Miss Jyoti is an urban designer with a background in architecture. She holds a master degree in urban strategies and design from the University of Edinburgh, UK. After completing BArch from Sushant School of Art and Architecture in Delhi, she had a 2 year stint in Dada and Partners in Gurgaon, where she worked on master planning, housing, institutional, and residential projects. Beside architecture, Ms. Jyoti has strong interest in research and academia with a focus on sustainable transport, social urbanism, and development issues in third world context. Through her secondary paper on informal cities and river pollution, she advocates principles of participatory and collaborative planning with a need for dialogue between various organizations and individuals to tackle challenges posed by mega cities like Delhi.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, thank you so much for being a part of this session. Today, I'll be talking about the role of private and third sector organizations in promoting active travel or strategies like walking and cycling in the city of Delhi. It's a master's dissertation which was submitted to the University of Edinburgh 2 months ago, and it conceptualizes on a much needed shift to non-motorized transport, and most importantly, its practical implementation in the highly complex and multiple stakeholder context of Delhi. So the study was carried out with a set of 6 objectives. The first objective was to get a background overview of air pollution and the general mobility pattern. The second was a literature study of successful case studies from comparable cities. That is, cities from either third world contexts or with similar pollution history. The third objective is to study previous impactful cycling promotion initiatives in Delhi's context and the role of organizations in these. The fourth objective is to briefly understand the system of local governance and the authoritative structures in the capital and what can be concluded from the existing NMT policies. And fifth and sixth objectives are basically methods implemented to reach out to the stakeholders, that is residents and practitioners, which I think always has an edge over desktop research alone. So this consisted of an online survey and interview of practitioners from the field who could discuss nuances in NMT planning beyond what is talked about in policies and guidelines. I'm not sure why this is happening in the slides, but I'll move on. So most of us are aware of Delhi's pollution crisis. Concentration of PM 2.5 particles is at 153 micrograms per cubic meter, which is 15 times more than the annual average of 10 as per WHO guidelines. And surprisingly, Beijing is just at 56. In terms of modal share, walking and cycling constitute 46% of the overall number of trips, which is still a high number, but this data is from 2007. And things have changed a lot after that, especially after the near doubling of the population in the last 1 decade alone. And I'm sure right now, very few people consider walking as an option in the poisonous air of Delhi. So let's discuss how people have addressed these issues in countries abroad. Beijing is a well-known example. It has a cycling rate of 32%, walking rate of 21%, and the last 10 years, Beijing has been successful in reversing the trend of increased car ownerships and regaining its reputation as a kingdom of bicycles. The most important steps are construction and upgradation of new and existing bike lanes, removal of old roadside car parks to build dedicated bike lanes, and cycling tours. When one questions whether it was public demand that caused this shift or strong leadership, it can be seen as a highly institutionalized top-down process, which works well in the Chinese political context. The next city is Curitiba. Although much smaller population, it is a successful example of integrated land use and transport planning from a similar third world context. The cycling rate is just 5%, but the BRTs cater to a huge population that relies heavily on public transport and NMTs. The municipality also initiated a major program called Curitiba Activa to increase public health awareness. Although Curitiba's case is a very top-down process in a dictatorial political context, the citizens are really environment conscious and exercise their right to the city effectively. So it can be seen as a case of both high public demand and strong leadership. Buenos Aires is perhaps one of the latest examples in the combination of both top-down and bottom-up process. The cycling rate has gone from 0.4 to 3.5 in the recent 4 years, which is great improvement, I think. And the government also has tie-ups with private companies for promoting bike-to-work incentives and soft loan schemes for purchase of new bikes. And most importantly, I think there is an increase in in cycle tourism, and many private cycle tour companies are promoting cycling as a healthier and cheaper way of getting around. So therefore, it's both a top-down and bottom-up process. Next is Rajshahi, is a very small city in Bangladesh, which has recently been in the news for reversing its reputation as one of the most polluted cities of the world. And this has been possible through its massive tree plantation drive in the last 10 to 15 years, and cleaning up of a lot of brick kilns that are present in the city. Although investment in active travel has been very recent, Rajshahi has had the will to invest in dedicated bike lanes. And despite limited financial resources and similar climatic environment as the Indian subcontinent, I would say the move is a commendable one. So we'll now look into previous impactful initiatives that we have had in Delhi and the role of organizations in the same. So Rahagiri Day, modeled on the lines of Bogota's Cyclovia, has been a phenomenal success, as recorded in a report by Embark India, which says that 66% respondents now own a bike after participating in Rahagiri. So I categorize the role of organizations involved into 3 sections: initiators, investors, and facilitators. And this includes NGOs, cycling clubs, high school as initiators, and then trusts and sponsor private companies as investors. And then finally, the governmental bodies like NDMC and Delhi Police as facilitators. Similarly, Bicycle Partnership Program in 2008 was a Dutch initiative in partnership with TRIP, which is IIT Delhi's transport department. And it was noted that there are no thumb rules as such for who acts as initiator, investor, or facilitator in both these examples. But from these examples, we now know that the government sector is involved in sustainable transport. The NGO or the third sector is involved in sustainable transport. And startups like cycling clubs and private sector companies are now involved in sustainable transport. But clearly, there hasn't been a big initiative or a shift as described in the cities discussed earlier, which means there is clearly a gap between the efforts of the public, private, and third sector. So we need to find a way to integrate these efforts in a holistic way. So this was done with first an understanding of what kind of organizations we have who are working in this area and who are involved in NMT sector, what is their accountability, whether they're accountable to the state or center or municipal authority, or if they're an independent organization, or if they're a collaboration of small organizations, like in the case of an organization where they agree to achieve a certain target, like the UN. And most importantly, what is their role, whether it's a research body, a think tank, a design consultancy, or just a partnership or a collaboration between different organizations. The next step was to understand the system of federal governance in the capital. Now, administration in Delhi is very complicated, or I would say it happens at 3 levels: center, state, and the municipal authority. And the state's prime body is the Public Works Department. And the municipal authority consists of NDMC, MCD, which is further divided into North, South, and East zones, and the Delhi Cantonment Board. Now, while the NDMC and DCB are accountable to the center, MCD is an independent body, which means that it is possible to have 3 different parties ruling at the center, state, and MCD at the same time, which has not really happened in the past, but it is possible to have that possibility. As far as policies are concerned, for all national policies, the government documents recommend PPT model. But I noticed that there is a significant and impressive involvement of the third sector in data collection and research. So looking at that, it would perhaps be a good idea to pass on that job to the third sector based on their expertise, areas of expertise, to avoid duplication of the same kind of data in the public sector and the third sector. Also, the third sector can ensure that private companies fulfill CSR requirements efficiently. Okay, so now we'll get on to the next objective of impact assessment survey, which was an online survey that I conducted a few months ago. And before I conducted the survey, I did a few case studies on how bike assessment surveys happen in countries like Germany, UK, and Copenhagen. But obviously, these involve a massive investment, and nothing of that scale has happened in India. But we do have academic papers from premier institutes like IIT Kanpur, which try to assess the reactions of residents on possible NMT policies. So in the survey that I took, most respondents were from South Delhi and NCR region. And I think 86% felt that Delhi's pollution crisis is serious and needs to be dealt with utmost urgency. If you have a look at the generic mobility pattern, 53% completed most part of their journeys in private car, 26% used the metro, and 8% used the auto rickshaws. 7% used bikes, and just 1% used the public bus, which is a worrisome figure. 92% agreed that more public money should be invested in cycling infrastructure. 90% said that they would bike to work if there were incentives from schools and companies. And clearly, 97% were positive about promotion programs on active travel and community well-being. So overall, it's a big yes. Perception of bikes are overwhelmingly positive, and 80% agree that bikes have the potential for last-mile connectivity. There was a clear majority for dedicated bike lanes and bike share schemes when questioned about where the public money should be invested in bike infrastructure. But there are many limitations of this survey, and one of the biggest problems was that it was a small sample size and the geographical scope was very limited. Most importantly, it only catered to a computer and English literate population. The next section was to interview practitioners from public, private, and third sector organizations. And there were many themes that emerged from the conversations, which I'll discuss in points. Two interviewees felt that there was less consultation or participation from different stakeholders in the public sector while formulating policies and devising proposal. Almost all 7 interviewees mentioned that there needs to be a clear institutional structuring of the government agencies with clearly defined roles. 2 interviewees felt that there needs to be a reorientation of priorities in politics, which means that you cannot be talking about NMT policies and infrastructure only in policy documents and inaugurating new flyovers every day. Almost everyone felt that there is a need for more involvement of the private sector in NMT infrastructure and promotion. One interviewee pointed out that funding for many local NGOs is a problem, as there is no clearly defined remuneration types for NGOs that act as advisory and not as consultants. Although many people from the survey pointed out that the climate of Delhi was unsuitable for cycling, a cycling enthusiast and an entrepreneur who's the head of a cycle tour company felt that Delhi has a good weather for cycling for at least 6 months in a year. 2 interviewees stressed on the role of design to make cycle rickshaws faster and more efficient, and discussed the role of the scope of battery-driven vehicles. And 2 interviewees stressed on how promotion of cycle tourism could be a great trendsetter and encourage more people to cycle. Lastly, one interviewee rightfully pointed out on the need to bridge the gap between utility cycling and leisure cycling, as the latter is gaining popularity, but little is being done to address the issues of how low-income riders who cycle to work for lack of options. So I rationalized these themes into 3 categories of consultation or design consultation, implementation, and promotion, which I call the three processes in NMT planning. So based on all of this analysis, my next agenda was to establish a role between these processes and the role of organizations as initiators, investors, or facilitators, as discussed earlier. So these organizations are involved in activities, as you can see on the left, which lead to the process of promotion, design, consultation, and implementation. To understand their phasing, it can be said that there are two options, two ways to look at it. Either promotion leads to design consultation, which leads to implementation, or we can say that promotion is independent of design consultation and implementation, and it can keep happening side by side, which is option B. So based on these principles, I try to devise a possible way of clearly defining the processes with the organizations and their role to generate an effective model. Due to time constraints, I'm not getting into the specifics of the table, but I'm happy to take questions later on. After all this discussion, there are still many unanswered questions that need to be discussed. Can more public investment be allocated to promotion and awareness rather than infrastructure? How can policy ensure involvement of the private sector in providing incentives? How can road safety for cyclists be ensured in proposed bike share schemes? And what design considerations can be taken into account to combat climatic discomfort? So drawing some final sets of conclusions, I can now say that efforts of the private and third sector can be integrated with the public sector and has been noticed in successful initiatives like BPP, Rahagiri Day, and CGM's work with the government. Then practitioner interviews help analyze nuances in planning processes, which are otherwise not communicated through literature review. The survey, although limited in its outreach, was a good starting point to project adoptable strategies. Also, most importantly, the paper acknowledges the limitations of reliance on bikes only due to long travel distances and climatic discomfort. However, I feel that cycles have a great potential in last mile connectivity, and they need to be promoted more in order to change, to bring a culture of responsibility amongst the citizens. Because I think the biggest problem is the attitude that, amongst residents in Delhi. So that's the end of this presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions.